Hello, man.
Hey, hey.
So I think the topic of discussion tonight, I think we were going to go over managerialism, technocracy, or techno-feudalism, whatever term we want to use, and the new system of bureaucratic dominion over all aspects of life, the spiritual angle of that, and how that relates to the enhancing of the soul trap of the demiurgos. Do you have any thoughts upon that?
Well, it is the intention. Um, I don't think that it will be ultimately successful, but yes, it is the apparent and evident intention behind the movement. Um, I don't think it will be successful because there's always a certain balance maintained, and there are certain boundaries, I think, that would never be allowed to be crossed. Let's say, in terms, when I say allowed, it's not like there's an entity regulating, but there's a sort of balancing of forces in the reality that do not allow a complete tip over to one side or the other. But yes, that is the intention. Um, what what I also do see is that, as with any adversary or obstacle, it is also there with the function of allowing for mirrored self-observation. As everything that sort of gets in your way is a means to get to know a part of yourself that otherwise would be unrecognized. So I think that there are many factors at play, but indeed the intention of the movement seems to be evident of that feudalism. It's the ultimate feudalism. Communism is the ultimate feudalism, and when you involve technology to the degree of that is being pushed, it will be certainly called techno feudalism. So I agree with that.
It's very interesting as well, the contrast between the likes of feudalism, which, the majority of people today would see as extremely primitive. And then you've got this technological aspect that seems to be almost correcting the issues that you had with non-technological feudalism. So it's interesting how we've came full circle, but I agree with what you mentioned there, that within this malaise, this darkness, this web of ignorance, and viewing the storm that is upon the horizon and edging ever closer to us, there is an opportunity there for our own personal growth. And of course, the personal growth that the individual experiences, if that is multiplied throughout the various, throughout the society as a whole, or the nation, or the tribe, or a group, even a group such as our own, that aids in the preservation of truth and the truth of the metaphysics of this world and where we seem to be and who we are. In regards to the demiurgos, it almost seems as, like what you stated, it's not a force that's controlling this directly. It almost appears to be that we are the pleroma. We contain the pleroma, or the fullness of all of the various archetypes and potentialities separated out into us. They are contained within our psyche. Some parts of the archetypes and maybe active in one person, but necessarily dormant in the next, right? One group may exude the archetype of the demiurgos, of this controlling Faustian nature, this techno-feudalist or managerialist nature, and then one group may totally contrast that, may exude a more spiritual nature, what a nature that is very similar to the pneumaticoi. The the spiritual ones, those who are most natural.
Yes, and as you well know, my opinion is that the demiurge is more a title than an actual entity per se, with an intention of itself. And when we understand, and this is, in my view, as you well know from other conversations, key to understand, when we do understand how shadows work, because shadows, one of the things that needs to be said is that a shadow is a balancing force. It is a contrary force of something that has been rejected, that shouldn't have been rejected. And when it's rejected enough, it becomes an opposition. It becomes a contrary application of a force, right? So an obstacle, let's say, or even an opponent, etc. And when we do understand that shadows are that, and when we have experienced in our lives that we can even unconsciously embody shadows of someone else, so become opposition of someone else without even realizing it. We just play that part without active volition. It just happens that we become the vehicles for that. Then we do understand that what is at place in the figure of the demiurge is a balancing force of something that has long been rejected, neglected, therefore, and needs to be addressed. And the only way it has, let's say, to make itself heard is to obtain power. And of course, that power will not win in the end, because that is not the actual purpose of reality, to have a victory. But it will amass enough power to the point of those that need to confront themselves with themselves, let's say, and with what has been neglected and rejected in the past, will have to do so one way or another. Another thing that is important to understand is that right now, the title of the demiurge, so let's, as I've put it in the chapter of your book, the throne room of the demiurge is changing its personality. And so we do see a transition of terms of a facade from the previous mystical kind of presentation, as was evident in the Piscean energy, let's say, to a more supposedly, and I repeat, supposedly scientific presentation of the Aquarian, scientific technological presentation of the Aquarian. But it is, in fact, and at its essence, conveying the same types of rejected material. And we really must understand, and I think that we can only go around in circles if we don't. This is my opinion. We really must understand the dynamics of not only the generation of shadows, but the resolution of shadows, or as Jung would put it, the individuation, the integration of shadow, which means that it's no longer rejected, that its message has been received, and that it has been properly dealt with, therefore being reassigned to its proper place in the psyche, and therefore no longer opposing the self, but working for the self. And you talk about the Faustian metaphor. And one of the interesting things in that play is when Faustus asks Mephistopheles, well, if you are damned in hell, why are you outside of hell? And Mephistopheles says, well, do you think that I, who have witnessed the presence of God and tasted of eternal bliss, am I not condemned to 1,000 hells just by being deprived of it?
Yeah.
And this is what the shadows are in that sense. They want to return to the self, but they were rejected, and they were rejected again by something that I very much talk about, by the dynamics also between pride and shame. Right? To be rejected, it means that they were put to shame by something that was proud. And so it creates a sort of a pendulum from one side to the other that feeds each other continuously, because sometimes pride is winning and other times shame is winning. And it's always a continuous back and forth. But it needs to find that balance point of individuation, of the proud reducing itself to a middle point, and the shameful rising itself to a middle point, so that they can meet and sort of embrace and actually authentically realize what was going on there, right? The motives for the rejection, which usually has to do with something that does not fit a self-image, therefore the pride, and the motive of the opposition, which has to do with not being accepted and having been cast out of its proper place. So once this dynamic is understood, the back and forth can cease, at least for some of the individuals. It will not be a collective thing, in my opinion. In collective terms, we will see a continuous turning of the tables. So those that have some sort of empowerment right now in society will eventually be the rejected again. And I've also put this in the chapter of your book about the alphabet crowd, right? That, yeah, the alphabet crowd have been empowered, but eventually they will come to a point where the things will turn again, because they have created so much animosity, so much rejection on the other side, that it will just spring back against them, right? If you push against the spring will gain even more potential power until you can't hold it anymore, and it will push you back, right? So I think that this is key to understanding what is going on, Silas. I'm not sure if I was able to explain myself well, but
No, I absolutely understand what you're meaning.
yeah.
To pick one point up from that, though there's multiple things I want to say regarding that. Regarding the alphabet crowd, for example, and your ideas surrounding the shadow, this idea of the etymology of monster, I believe, derives from a French word, montrer, which means to display. And it's that idea that monsters don't necessarily just cling to the shadows in terms of they're obscured by them, but they seek to be seen. They seek to be displayed into the world, and to garner attention, to sort of scream out into the void that Yalda Baoth established that they exist. And there is a part of the psyche, and I think it's almost, it's like what you mentioned regarding the force. It's almost a failsafe inbuilt within that force, which seeks the perpetuation of existence, which seeks to establish, create Lush, that momentum, that currency of momentum, which maintains the wheel. And I mean, it goes beyond just suffering. It's something that it's the sort of potency of momentum. It's something that establishes it, the spark of it. But as well, regarding the shadows, it's interesting because when we discuss enlightenment, and even what we do here, I mean, I think I stated it, and I've just found it, the quote here, where I stated it once. That being, if the lie is the inversion of truth, then we but simply need to reorientate it by analysis and critique. This speaks to our focus within these circles. Do we truly focus on truth or the shadow of it within the lie? Do we gain insight from the light or the shadow it casts? You know, these are they're very fundamental questions. Even the idea of, say, a Buddhist monk going into forms of meditation. When he closes his eyes, it's almost an instinctive thing, right? It's cross-cultural, this idea of meditation. Even prayer as well. It's introspective. Whenever we go introspectively into our own psyche, into ourself, we close our eyes. We embrace the darkness, the nothingness, the monad, if you will. And it's this pleroma, this deep blackness. It's not a void. It's something beyond that. It's the potential of everything, yet unrealized within nothingness, within the seedbed of nothingness, right? And by nothing, we just mean it's immaterial. So it's interesting that you gain enlightenment by closing your eyes and embracing the darkness. So it speaks to what you're stating. And in many ways, I also pointed out within that post, I think it was actually a brief dialogue I had with Critical and Al, where I stated the world is almost like a camera obscura of God, or the demiurgos is like a camera obscura of God. That the bestial aspect of the self, the bestial aspect that we exhibit within this world as a condition of our need for self-preservation it is produced from the shadow of the psyche, but it's an inversion of God. It's an inversion of it. So it's similar to what you stated regarding, the devil within Goethe's Faust, that he's tasted of the fruits. He's tasted of, he's supped from the chalice of eternal life and of the pleroma. But within his separation, within the shadows that are radiated out from that self-division of the pleroma, or however the metaphysical separation occurred, there's a part of him that's constantly seeking to go back, but it's that self-conflict between seeking to go back and the bestial aspect of himself that seeks the perpetuation of existence and the revolution of the wheel of existence. It's that conflict that almost keeps us within the present moment. It's what maintains us within the pendulum swings between the past and the the past and the future, rather. It's that which maintains us in the I am and I will be, if that makes sense.
Well, I would say that the shadow has no volition in the matter, and if you've ever experienced, I don't know if you have, and if you did, you would only realize afterwards. But if you've ever embodied someone else's shadow, and you realize that your actions were being a reflection of someone else, a reflection of rejected material of someone else, you will realize that a shadow really does not have a will of its own. It is merely reacting as an inversion, a necessary inversion of the energy that rejected it, that rejected its pure state before it fell into shadow, let's say. And in the same way that if you would say, okay, if you have two polarities of positive and negative. And in the middle would be a stasis point between the two, right? And this is where both the positive and the negative meet and are in balance, in stasis. If, for example, the positive pushes away the negative towards the other side, then the negative gains a charge, right? It gains a potential. It gains a contrary force that it has nothing to do with its wish, with its volition, with its intention. So this would be the first thing that I would comment upon that. And this is not to excuse the behaviors of the shadows, is just to state how I view the mechanics, the sort of metaphysical, spiritual mechanics of it.
Yeah.
About the revelation, in the sense that the monster wants to be revealed. I mean, in every legend, story, even in popular culture, films, books, etc., you always see that the villain loves, when he's got the hero at his mercy, the villain always loves to have this big speech. Why? Because that is all he wanted in the first place. He wanted to be heard. He wanted the hero, so the representative of the other side, to acknowledge his cause, to acknowledge his motives, right? To listen to him about why he did what he did. And usually, and it's not infrequent, that you find in these speeches some sort of sympathy towards the devil, let's say, right? Oh, he had a point, in the sense of, I understand why he began his crusade against the good guys in that particular, fable, legend, story, whatever, right? And this is exactly an involuntary part of the balancing force, because that is the end goal, is to be revealed as the message to the other side. But the other side will only listen when he's weakened enough not to fight back, right? Because he was cast down by force of will, in this case, force of rejection. And only when the things invert will the rejector be able to listen to the rejected, right? So this is, as, even if you could put it in a sort of a scientific equation, it could be seen like that the revelation is the purpose, not the defeat of the other side. The defeat of the other side is the means for the revelation. It is to weaken enough so that he has to listen.
So in that sense, the alphabet people, if you will, and the sort of bizarre fashion that we see, I mean, that's a visual aspect of what we see. I mean, of course, there's the mental shadows that they eject or excrete into the world. In many ways, what that is in a sort of alert, a revelation, yes, a cry for help in many ways. That they seek to be heard.
Yeah. I mean, if we see, for example, I mean, let's take into account, and of course, you know that I am very skeptical towards written history, but let's take into account the written history, and you would see that Christians were at first persecuted, and then they came into power, right? And they started persecuting those that persecuted them. But the objective was to show that, hey, we have the right to, and we have a place to this line of thinking. But they became themselves, in the process of doing that, they became themselves the oppressors. And so they generated a shadow of themselves as well, right? And now they're persecuted again. You understand? So this is what I mean by the back and forth, the pendulum sort of going from one polarity to the other. And of course, in the past, the what created the alphabet crowd, if someone had a tendency for homosexuality or something like that, they would immediately be rejected, right? And this was not addressed. This is just an example, as the example of, and a small thing that could have been addressed at the time. Since it was immediately rejected and not addressed and not put it into its proper place, it grew as a shadow force. It grew as an opposition force. And this is applicable to every kind of duality. Because in all dualities, the only victory, if we could call it that, the only purpose is a balance, is to find that stasis point, that balance point of integration. Because there is a place for, of course, not for the grotesque that we see on the shadows, but what generated that grotesque, because it only became grotesque due to the rejection, the continuous rejection, the continuous neglect of being addressed, right? If you, you leave garbage in the garbage can, right? And you neglect it. And then you start seeing flies around, right? And those flies disturb you. And then the flies turn into other kinds of insects. And, everything smells rotten all of a sudden. And it was a gradual thing, right? So the flies are not to blame. The rotten stench is not to blame. What was to blame was that there was a neglect. It was a rejection that the garbage was there to be disposed of in the first place, or to be taken care of or cleaned, or, So it wasn't the fact that it wasn't addressed, that it wasn't put into its proper place, generated the stench, the flies, the insects, and so on and so forth, until you come to a point where, well, this is going to be a dirty job to now clean the can, because it's now so rotten, so dirty, so right, that it's now a dirty job.
Yes.
But it's the only way that you paid attention to it, when it became so obvious that you couldn't ignore it anymore. Right?
Yeah, it was only by its its decay, in which one took notice, in which it sort of heralded its presence. And interestingly as well, I wanted to make note of the idea surrounding this idea surrounding subtractive growth as a key component within the metaphysics of the cosmos, it seems. And that is something you brought up, which is only by, it seems, either the suppression of the opposite force, which subsequently defines its sort of counterpoint. So, for example, life would be defined by its contrast with death. It's not necessarily defined, on its own terms. Mm-hmm. Thus, it's like the yin and yang. You find the opposite within its opposite. So, by that, we see that life begets death, death begets life. So, in many ways, it seems that the shadow begets the revelation that you require the excreta for life. That life, in many ways, is excreta. It's a product of it. And in that sense, in terms of what sacrifice means, and again, this is sort of getting into George Bataille's work, which I don't agree with him on everything, but let's just, explore these topics. Mm. That idea of sacrifice, or literally from the Latin to make holy, in many ways, that establishes that stasis, which is the present moment. It slows the velocity of energy down. It slows it is the meeting point between the immovable force and the immovable object and the unstoppable force, right? Or the life and death, light and dark. The present moment, the material world, is that stasis point in which the spirit, the pneumas, from its descent, is contained therein, in these fleshly vessels temporarily. Yes, I mean, it's very interesting because in that sense, and in what we're discussing here and exploring, the demiurgos is required. But then it poses the question, metaphysically, if there is even a purpose to this. What ultimately is the purpose? Is it the perpetuation of existence, which itself descends forth from the pleroma, of whom seems to, require or desire or need this experience of temporality and consciousness to, manifest its unconscious will, into
I
the
don't think
material
so.
world?
No, I
No.
don't think so. I don't think that it needs that for a perpetuation, because I think that the absolute, let's say, the absolute pleroma does not require an opposition to create. It creates if it wills to create, right? And it can create without opposition, without strife, without anything else. The purpose, in my view, of the demiurge, and yes, the demiurge and all the shadows and everything, they have a purpose, in my view. But the purpose is to show the creator that he is putting in simple terms that he's not as good as he thinks he is. Good in the sense of what is defined by good, what he himself defined as being good, right? And I usually use this metaphor. If you look at the mirror, right, you may look and you see a face and you say, well, I like the nose, I like the eyes, but the hair doesn't look good, or the ears are too big, or whatever, right? So there are parts of the face that you reject because they don't match to what you would like or what you would think that your self-image is, right? And so the demiurge uses that, and it will attack on those points until there comes an acceptance that you are a whole thing. And this is why it is not incorrect, in my view, it is not incorrect to say that whoever sits on the throne of the demiurge, whichever archetype sits on the throne of the demiurge, is the absolute as well. He is the absolute as well. He is just showing an aspect of the absolute that was not accepted as being the absolute, right? Oh, you think that you are only this image of, peace, quiet, and this. No, you also have the potential for this. And the fact that you reject, that you say that you do not have the potential, is what gave me power.
I see.
You know,
Yeah.
this is what the devil continuously keeps telling God in a esoteric sense, right? The devil keeps saying to God, and that's why it tries to humiliate all of its creation. It is to say, you see that you are this as well, and while you keep rejecting it, I will keep doing this until you hear me, until you confront yourself with me. You know, it's the devil is in hiding, yes, but he wants to come to the fore, and he wants to come to the fore onto the face of God and say to God all those things that he has had to swallow. In the same way that God wants to come in the face of the devil and say all the things that he had to swallow, in the sense of, look at what all that you've done to my creation. And this is a debate that has to come to a middle point. You know, like the Ophiuchus that we've discussed in previous conversations, like if the God is the man and the serpent is the devil, right? They are dancing and wrestling at the same time until eventually they embrace and they have to kill each other. The man squeezes the neck of the serpent until it strangles the serpent, and the serpent bites the man until he dies poisoned, right? But in that embrace of dissolution, they are integrated because that's the final acceptance of one another.
Yeah, the sacrifice,
Yeah.
the making,
Exactly.
the making holy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the in my view, um, in all these things is the symbolic made literal, and that is what spoils, let's say, the message, because sacrifice, even in the sense of you offer something that is living and pure to death, that is the creation. When we understand that the pleroma encompasses the entirety of the potentials of life, which in the end we must understand that life includes death, right? Death is a part that is included in life. And that's why you see it as differentiated between yin and yang, but in the pleroma, it's all together in potential.
Yeah.
Right? And so sacrifice is the act of the separation and at the same time reintegration of the yin and yang, of life and death, because it involves both. Right? And so sacrifice is the act of creation because it's the life separating into life and death, into two halves of the same thing, light and shadow, life and death, good, evil, etc. Right? But that does not necessarily mean that once everything is integrated, once everything has been acknowledged by the pleroma self, and of course, outside of time, this already happened. And of course, for our linear minds, that is a hard concept to grasp because we are. It's like we're in a movie that is still running, but outside of time, everything that ever was and will be has already happened.
Yeah.
So out there, let's say in the final state, everything was already integrated, and so creation can happen again as an emanation and no longer a sacrifice. And this is the symbol of Jesus, for example, right? Which was made literal.
Yeah.
Jesus was the sacrifice for the sins of the world. It was the sacrifice so that the world could exist within the separation, right? This is merely a symbol, a metaphor for something to be understood. But of course, when it's made literal, it loses meaning. It loses power, and we start chasing our own tails. And and then you hear stuff like, which makes possible for us to hear stuff like, "Is Trump Jesus?" Right? Or JFK is going to come back as Jesus or whatever. This is insanity, right? Because it was made literal. Because people that have made themselves compatible with the literal are expecting the literal, and they are running and evading the symbolic.
Well, in many ways, we see that within the world in general. That this idea of the Internet of all things, of which we see one of the various titles of these sort of demiurgic, not the demiurgos, but the demiurgic characters throughout history. For example, the Aten, which is the material emanation of Ra, or of the sun, if you will. It's the disk of the sun. It's that which we see, and not necessarily what the Egyptians believed, the sort of spirit or the pneumas that was behind the sun, the animus, the animating principle of it. But he was titled the Lord of all things. That was one of his epithets. And you have the Internet of all things. So it's the same idea that what they're seeking to do is establish this, coincidentia oppositorum, this unification of all, this reintroduction, this reestablishment of the state of the pleroma to take on the Ancient of Days archetype, if you will. And within that, by that, they're going to do that through digitalism, they think, or biodigitalism, or whatever, means that will take on, whatever form that will take on. The Internet of All Things is one example of that Harari gives. And he states that will be the new God. So what we see in that is, like what you stated, they seem to be taking the symbolic and attempting to make it literal in a sort of sacrilegious sense, and it's turned the entire world topsy-turvy, and it's inverted a lot of things in the world, because to do that they have to invert the world.
Yes, and isn't that a sort of continuation, let's say, and the sort of product of Sabbatean thinking?
Yes.
Right, where you have to bring about the worst of the worst so that the good comes as a counterforce more quickly, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Sabbateans had the idea that the Messiah would only come at the worst possible time. So if they provoke the worst, then he will come quicker. And I think that in a roundabout sort of insane way, this is what's being put in place. It is the forcing of the worst through convincing and manipulation and psychological technology and physical technology and electronic technology to force the worst to come about, so that the pleroma has no other choice, because in the same way that a shadow has no volition, the pleroma in a circumstance such as that has no volition as well, right? Because it's the spring on the other side, and it has to release from the other side as well, right?
Yes,
and this is not to say that they're the good guys, but the dynamics are more or less that, I think.
No, they're merely using the metaphysical truth that underpins the entirety of it underpins the foundations of the system, the fundamental principles behind the cosmos. That's what they're attempting to use. It's similar to the idea of the Gnostics and, say, I don't know, the Kabbalists, and there's a lot of overlap between them, because the metaphysical truth doesn't change. The external environment doesn't change. The observations that one may make do not change. There is nothing new under the sun. But it is the way that you utilize those truths that you observe, and the way you apply them and utilize them really, it displays your character. It displays your intent, your motivations. Your motivations are entirely material, or they are entirely of a spiritual quality. Or so we see. I mean, of course, the Gnostic term, the Gnostic label, it's an umbrella term. I mean, even the Kabbalists may be described as Gnostic in many ways, but what I'm referring to is sort of the early Christians, even the pre-Christian sects such as Druidism and such. You see that they had an understanding which seemed to go beyond the mere orthodox motivations of the priest class, or what we see within Kabbalism, and I mean even other some Vedic sects as well, who worship.
Yes, and I see that. I see that Druids or Druidism, if you prefer, are the priesthood for a long time. Have been the priesthood for a long time, because we do see. At least I do. I identify not only in terms of the religious kind of ideas, but the implementation, the methods, seem to be Druidic in nature. And of course, when we
Yes.
look at Hollywood is clearly Druidic, for example. Even the idea of the magic in the way that it's being applied seems to be stemming from Druidic magic,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, there were many sects of Druidism, Celtic, Nordic, so on and so forth, and even most certainly Vedic, as you said. But I think that the Druids were the, um, let's say, leftovers or inheritors of something bigger that came before them. Call it Atlantis, call it whatever you like.
Yeah, precursor
But
civilization. Yeah.
right, that they tried to utilize for. I mean, they would reveal themselves by their intent, as you've
Mm-hmm.
well stated. Right, they've tried to utilize some for power, some for other means, but the end result eventually is the balancing out. It is a sort of cosmic inevitability, I think, that it, it's visible. It's visible, I think, in the nature of reality that it always tries to push towards the balancing point. And when something is out of balance, an opposing force comes about. And this is at all levels: physical, um, metaphysical, spiritual, mental. Everything more or less in nature works this way.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about the revealing of the character by means of the way you use these things, and that goes against as well the personality that sits on the throne of Hephaestus. Right? If
Mm-hmm.
first you had Poseidon, Neptune, um, with its mystical kind of modus operandi, now you see the transition to Uranus and Chelus, right? If you prefer the Roman term,
Yeah.
um, of its technological and more scientific approach. But when you look at it, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. It's just the face of it and the way, the personality of it is different. And you can choose to say, well, I preferred the mystical
Mm-hmm.
instead of the scientifical. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because the object of the thing, the throne, and the technology that it has available for it is the same. It's just a personality that changes. It's like changing president, and
Yeah.
basically things go on the
It,
same way, right?
essentially, it's a different mask or a different
Yeah.
a different feeling. So, for example, within the Aeon of Aquarius, which I think you were alluding to there, yeah, Kalos or Chalos, Uranus, and though obviously traditionally the planet was Saturn or Kronos, but interestingly, there from a mythological standpoint, there is a, and I think that is probably a metaphor that belies what or speaks to what we're discussing here regarding the metaphysics. But anyway, yes, I agree. It's similar to light. That light, depending on the vibrational frequency that it is at, will um, will sort of reflect a different, or yeah, it will reflect off an object and provide us, the perceiver of it, a different, shade, a different hue, a color, a
Yeah.
chromatic expression. But the light itself doesn't change. It's merely how we perceive it. So the light itself is it's distinct. from the object from which it reflects. It shines on, and then the object reflects that to us. But the light itself doesn't change. And in many ways, I mean, in terms of the aeonic structure of time, time doesn't change. The pleroma doesn't change. The structure of existence and even non-existence doesn't change. What changes is our perception of it. What changes is the archetypes and the way they are expressed, depending upon the point in which we are at in terms of the cycle. Be it, the short-term cycles or the larger term cycles. I mean, the shortest cycle would be, cycles of generations, or even our life as well, right? So,
Truth.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The truth is already there.
Yes.
Like I stated previously, that it's already. It was before the creation, and it will continue to be after the creation. Truth is already there. And even in the Gospel of Thomas, there's one of the verses there that says, you lift a stone and the kingdom of God is there, and you move, I don't remember the exact thing, but you move something and you find it there. So it's always there. Truth is always there. But it is the fact that something is still to be addressed regarding a particular self-image. And this is why I make the distinction. And I know that a lot of people either don't like or don't particularly see it that way, which is fine by me. I mean, I'm not saying that I hold the truth by any means, but I do see that there's a difference between being and knowing. And if before the creation, the creator, let's say the pleroma, the truth, the everything was being, after the creation, it is continuously being, but now it knows, right? But during the time of the creation, and time is, in fact, part of an integral part of creation. It is attached to creation, so it has to play out. During that, you still see a sort of movement towards knowing, right? And that is what creates, or what makes us witness the separation between the self and the shadow. But the self and the shadow, right after the creation occurred, were all integrated, where everything was known immediately, right? And so the pleroma not only continued being omnipresent, but now it was also omniscient. It's just the fact that we are in the DVD, let's say, where the movie is playing out, and so we're inside of time, still witnessing the scenarios being played out that all already happened and all already finished, right? And the distinction between being and knowing, in my view, is also in the same way that the dynamics of shadow and self are. The distinction between being and knowing is also key, in my view, to understanding the reasons for everything in this regard. And again, I'm not saying that I hold the truth, but this is my present conclusion, let's say, my present view.
No, I mean, I have a similar understanding of the metaphysics as well. I wanted to point out too, it's you have the idea of the yantra and the mandala within, and this is a bit of a tangent, but in many ways it's not, within the Vedic cosmology, Vedic ritualism, Vedic tradition. And I thought it was interesting. Of course, mandala means circle in Sanskrit, but the yantra, which is typically, I think, is the square which usually encompasses the mandala.
Yeah.
Usually,
Mhm.
that's in Sanskrit means the machine or the
Mhm.
contraption. So it's very interesting because you see within the magnum opus the geometric symbolism that's contained therein is it's very similar to the mandala. Of course, you have the triangle, which is the generative symbol. It is probably a symbol of the soul, or even maybe the psyche, right? That which contains and processes the monad or the spirit, and then radiates it out, projects it into reality, and then obviously that reciprocally feeds back, and then you have the sort of the stasis of temporality or the illusion thereof, or whatever. So it's quite interesting that within the very geometric structures, and just harkening back to this idea of truth, within within the very geometric structures that we see present and possible within the cosmos, is distinct truth regarding the cosmology, regarding who we are, what we are, where we are. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts upon that.
Well, it is the squaring of the circle in a sense. In my view, it represents the idea of the willing sacrifice. So it was a voluntary act of the entirety being put into voluntarily creating and being subject to the limited in order to know itself. And of course, you see that in other traditions, such as the Norse, where you have Odin that voluntarily hung himself upside down to discover the runes, or where Odin gave up one of his eyes to Mimir to drink from the waters of the knowledge of the universe, right? So the sacrifice is a willing thing in order, because Odin knows that he will continue to be, right? But he wants to know, not only be. And so, of course, this is a personification and an anthropomorphization. I don't know if this word is correct, of
As you,
this idea. Yeah, of this idea that the whole is but doesn't know, and in order for it to know, he has to face the sacrifice of being exposed to the shadows, of being exposed to the evil, of even facing defeat, as eventually Odin faced in Ragnarok, because that was not a victory. It wasn't a victory for either side. Everyone died basically, and the reality was reset, right? With the new, of course, Adam and Eve, where in the Norse mythology they have different names. I don't recall them right now.
Leaf and Leith Thrasir.
Yeah, yeah. And so in my view it represents that. So the circle would be the entirety, would be the living complete principle.
Yeah.
And by creating the square just outside of it, just by its perimeter, it voluntarily becomes subject to the square. It becomes subject to the rules of duality, separation, strife, sacrifice, willing sacrifice, in order to get to know it himself or itself, whatever, which is an act of creation, like I said previously, and that is, I think, the all of these traditions show these stories and these symbols to be interpreted as symbols, because these things cannot be conveyed in any other way but through
Yes.
metaphors, parables, and so on. But when these parables become literal, then you lose the meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as well, you lose yourself. You lose yourself. So
Correct. Yeah.
the higher language is symbolism because it speaks to a deeper quality of the thought before it's translated within into language. And I've mentioned to Zeal many times that there is a modulation of the thought. There's a narrowing of its dynamic potential. We call it in music quantizing. So you essentially delete all of the various dynamic ranges within the song to make it more palatable for and more packageable for digital software, digital audio software. It's very similar to what occurs within the mind. And I think symbolism speaks to the highest possible material quality that linear thinking can grasp and comprehend. And it is very much like a key. It is a key. I think the esoteric schools have it
Yes.
right there. These are keys which unlock doors, the doors of perception. And once we peer beyond those doors, we can glimpse at the truth of it all. But interestingly as well, regarding, I think Zeal actually wants to join the chat. I'll try and get critical.
Oh.
No.
About or try to. Let me see.
No. You stay. If critical's on, could you send critical a message right now, and just call him right now, just to add another person to the chat. One more person, just to change the settings.
I'm pretty sure I have the permissions.
Well, in the meantime, since you touched upon music, one of my, well, not one, it's my favorite musician is Keith Jarrett, and he is my favorite musician due to his solo improvised piano works. Well, not just piano actually, but mostly piano. And one of the things that you witness in every improvised work that he's done, is that he has moments of rhythmicality, familiarity, right, where you can follow the proposed harmony, the proposed melody, and so on and so forth. And then he has moments of deconstruction where he deconstructs the previous segment in order to build a new one, right? And this is something that I only realized years and years after listening, and I didn't understand what fascinated me so much about his improvised works. And this was a key point of what really got me into it, which was that it was the same thing as he created a metaphorical world, musical world, in a certain segment, right? And you were comfortable within that world. You were comfortable because you knew the harmony goes this way, and he's playing the melody over this harmony. And all of a sudden, he would deconstruct, he would steer away from the rhythm, he would steer away from the harmonics, he would steer away from the melody, so that a new world could be created afterwards. And it was this back and forth between yin and yang, life and death, even in a representation of a musical piece that was improvised. And the fact that it is improvised is of extreme importance. Really, it gave me so much of the idea of transcendence, of what lies beyond the duality. You understand?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I find it a lot with a lot of the music that I like. It does something similar too. And I mean, I try to write music that I very much like it, especially when I get to middle eight. It's like what you're saying, where you break down, it's not even modulation. You move to something not entirely different. I mean, there's still familiarity there, but something that maybe the rhythm may change, or there's a deconstruction of the rhythm. There's a deconstruction of the melody. Yes, it's a simplification of it in many ways as well. That can be quite good. In terms of music, there was something I was going to mention regarding the Norse mythology. I'm sorry to digress again, but in regards to this desire of Odin to know, which is something we see with a lot of Lords of Frenzy, which is what Votan means etymologically, which is you see that he teamed up with Vili and Ve, his brothers. So you have the Trinity, right? And they killed Ymir. So it's the same idea that I've posted within. Oh God, I better not reference it because it probably won't show up in the video. But you have the generative symbol of the triangle, right? That's the Trinity. Odin, Vili, Ve, and they murder Ymir, who exists within Gununga Gap, which is it's the monad. It's the pure potential. It's the I believe it's the chasm. Oh God, I forget the etymology now. The wide chasm, the primordial chasm, if you will.
Yeah, the chaos.
Chaos chasm. Yeah. So they murder that. They destroy that. It's very similar to how Saturn or Kronos mutilates Uranus or Chelos. And from that, they establish all of the gods, all of the elements, and then from the elements is creation then established and man established and what have you. But it's interesting because this idea of Odin being, and it seems throughout the mythology, the various mythologies, that Odin is constantly seeking to know of his fate. He wants to know of his fate. And it's interesting because he's wise, yet he must realize that because he is artificial, he was established, from birth. He was born, I believe, of Ymir and I forget the consorts now. But anyway, he was established artificially, so thus the inevitability of everything would suggest that he will die, he will perish.
Yes.
Yet he doesn't. It seems that he doesn't accept that fate. He, like what we see with the managerialist class, the wicked sorcerers, right, that probably existed within these precursor civilizations, whatever the name may have been, Atlantis, the Tower of Babel, all of these cautionary tales of the Faustian bargain, that he pursued forbidden knowledge, he pursued knowledge to try and reverse his own mortality, to try to become like God, right? Or try to become like that which birthed him, that which birthed everything. But the problem is, to become that, you have to become nothing. You have to become immaterial, so you end up destroying yourself or destroying the civilization, so on and so forth. So in many ways, it begs the question, to know, is that the path to destruction? Is that the stepping stone? Is that the first stepping stone to destruction? Because is it within...
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to finish this point really quickly. Is it within the human condition? Is it inherent to the human condition, rather, that knowledge will always be misused? It really begs the question, to know, is that is that itself the sort of, what would the word be? Does that lend itself to the inevitability? Does that lead to the inevitability of, or does that lead to fate realizing itself? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've probably
Yeah. Well,
described that terribly.
coming from the previous principle in the conversation, that if we come from the principle that creation was being wanting to know, right? Then knowledge itself will always lead to a sort of destruction. It is a destruction of the creation as it was, so that the integration of being and knowing can occur. And then the creation becomes an emanation. And an emanation is no longer something that is downgraded from the creator, let's say, but it is a sort of um, direct, complete, pure manifestation of the creator, right? So it's no longer an artificial thing, but a living manifestation. And for that to occur, of course, that the false must be destroyed. And that comes through knowledge. And when you ask yourself, well, can knowledge ever be, or should knowledge be contained? It's impossible to be contained, because that is the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation is for the observer to know itself. And no matter how many obstacles you put in its way, knowledge, self-knowledge, will always emerge through the natural dance of the opposing forces of rejected and rejector, right? So yes, there is an inevitability to knowledge. And no matter how much Odin and all these other homologous figures,
May I interject?
yeah,
I do apologize. Just a thought that came to me. That idea of the shadow or the rejection by the will to know, does, like all light, by the mere presence of light, it creates shadow. Thus, by the will to know, does that form shadow? Does that form its own rejected excretia in many ways?
no, I would say to that knowledge, the one that doesn't know and wants to know, is in the shadow part, and knowledge is the perceived light. But the perceived light and the perceived shadow are one and the same. And this is the ultimate knowledge that happens at the end.
Yes, yeah.
And so by colliding or embracing, or whichever metaphor one wants to use, by colliding one with the other, so the seeker obtaining the knowledge, or whatever, they will dissolve one into the other, and therefore destroyed. But the
Yes.
destruction is, in fact, a return to a true state, because it is a destruction to a world of duality, to a world that is, let's say, not living,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not living in the absolute sense, right? So it's in a sense dying to death, right? Which is the yin coming together with the yang, or whatever way you want to symbolize that.
Yeah, the great work, the coincidentia positorum, the unification of all of
Yeah.
these opposites. Yeah.
To go back to your original question, as far as is knowledge, are you capable of garnering an amount of knowledge without falling susceptible to your own potential negative tendencies? No longer having benevolent intentions. And just to throw around some colloquial expressions, I mean, knowledge is power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think it's just a matter of, is it possible to, just transcending self-knowledge, but, more into the esoteric realm. Can you garner that knowledge and still be a good actor, if you will? And I don't think there is a good answer to that question directly.
Yes, yeah. That's
Yeah,
those are salient points.
in the,
Hello's. Oh, sorry, Armin. I'll let you jump in.
no, go on, Zeal.
Hello, all. No, I'm not much good to you guys here now, don't I? I'm just kind of listening in. I'd need it's a heavy enough conversation. I'd need to kind of listen in for a while before I get an angle on it. So you continue. I'm listening here in the background. Thanks.
By the way, Zeal, are you coming in August as well?
I'm hoping to. Yeah. I still have to finalize at my end, but I'm hoping to. Yeah.
All right. And as
yeah.
you told me, you prefer to find lodging elsewhere, right?
I probably will. Yeah. You see,
Okay.
I have to figure out what's happening with her. She might be coming. I don't know. I have to see what the story is. If she's not, I'll probably come. But I don't want to encroach on you either, man. I'm happy to get somewhere nearby. Maybe you can recommend somewhere,
Well, it's I just need to know beforehand. That's all.
Yeah, fair enough.
'Cause,
Fair enough.
yeah.
100%. 100%. I'll get word to you as soon as I can. As soon as
All
I
right.
know myself. But thanks for the offer and all that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Anyway, regarding meditating's point, of course, that in the process of obtaining any kind of knowledge, inevitably the self is revealed. And since the self contains both that which is considered good and that which is considered evil, one thing always brings the other. So the evil parts and the good parts are both revealed. And then, of course, it comes down to a moral choice. It is a choice, an active agency of that individualized potential of preferring this route or that route, or even the third route, which is a balance between the both. But those are always revealed. It is inevitable that with the knowledge comes the revelation of all the parts of the self, even those that you weren't aware of, right? So I would say it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess in light of these revelations, is it possible to guarantee that you stay in the light? You recognize the
No,
evil for what it is. I guess.
no guarantees. There's no guarantees in this world.
Sure. Let me.
One of the things that governments always try to do is to guarantee something that can't be guaranteed. We guarantee your safety, for example, right? We
Yeah.
guarantee that this, economy will be stable or whatever, right? It can't be. There are no guarantees.
But
that was a poor choice of words. Yeah.
Isn't this the issue as well, that by the need for guarantees or predictability, which seems to underpin the very institution of government, by them seeking out predictability, by them seeking out knowledge as well, that they garner, or they in many ways produce or yield the total inverse. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's the same with efficiency too. The more efficient you attempt to make something, the more inefficient it becomes. And that is just merely a fact of the social dynamics and the seeming, ignorance of it by the managerial state, or the technocratic state, or just the state in general. But in many ways, back to that idea regarding the Ophiakis, that both dissolve into the other, that the light dissolves into the dark and vice versa, by the pursuit of knowledge, which I think you were it's alluding to. And, well, in essence, on a civilizational scale, we see with the garnering of technology, the development of technology, the pursuit of the Promethean flame, if you will, that, the children play with fire, and eventually they get rendered to ash, right? Sorry, that was a bit morbid, but
No, it's a nursery rhyme.
yeah,
Ashes will fall down.
ashes to ashes. So absolutely, yeah. But it's in many ways, by them pursuing all of that, do they discover their own the characteristic that underpins the state, that they sort of exhibit their own nefarious and their own nefarious nature in many
Yeah.
ways, which is
Yeah,
what we
it's
see within the
that is
informational
inevitable,
age.
and that is not only inevitable, but it is in fact, whether it is conscious or subconscious, it is in fact what they want. They want to reveal themselves in the same way that a shadow wants to be
Yeah,
exposed to the self in
or the
order
monster.
to, or the
Yeah,
monster, yeah,
from
in
the
order
etymology
to,
Montreal. Yeah,
correct, in order to show itself and say, hey, now you will acknowledge me, right? And again, I go back that not every, but a lot of stories, fables, legends, um, movies, everything, it's all encompassing. You have the villain in the end when the hero is at its mercy, doing this great speech of exposing all of its motives, all of its, all of its plans, and so on and so forth. Exactly, because he wants to be heard. The villain wants to be heard. That is even more than defeating the opponent. He wants to be acknowledged as the victor. He wants to be acknowledged. It's like a son that was cast away, and it's not like it's most probably more factual than that description might be more factual. It's a son that was cast away, and he wants to defeat his father in order to say to his father, do you see now that I
yeah.
shouldn't have been cast away? Do you see how great I've become?
It's similar to Uranus and Saturn, and then
Correct.
later on
Yeah.
Saturn and Jupiter, or
And Zeus, yeah.
Saturn and Zeus. Yeah,
Zeus.
Cronus and Zeus. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And who castrates Zeus? It doesn't occur in the mythology, but in my opinion, it's Dionysus.
yeah. Oh God, I forget the etymology of Dionysus. I think it's Little Zeus or something. Yeah. So yeah, Bacchus, or
Bacchus in Roman.
yeah. So it's. I mean, it's interesting as well. You have that story within Euripides' Bacchae, I believe, where he discusses. Oh God, I forget the king. He attempted to outlaw the Bacchaean frenzy, or Dionysus. I believe he also went by the term Attis, of course, within Anatolian, the Kybalion cult, and or the Sibylline cult, and he goes up to the the mount where they are, engaged in this Bacchic frenzy, all the women and men there, and he's hanging from a tree or something, and he's looking down, attempting to observe them, and he falls from the tree, and in their total frenzy, their rage, their Bacchic frenzy, they rip him, tear him apart, limb from limb. So, I mean, it's very interesting. You see the likes of Bacchus and this idea of the frenzy, or the vibrational state in many ways, and the clinging to the letting, the permittance of the bestial nature, the shadow self, and the likes of Wotan or Odin, the Lord of Frenzy, the etymology. It's interesting, this cross-cultural overlap between them all of the various mythologies. Now, is that based just upon, again, the observation of the metaphysics, which seem to be apparent everywhere? Or is it speaking to something else, like a precursor civilization? It may lend credence to that idea. Yeah, both.
I
Yeah.
think it's both. I think it was unified, and then once separation occurred, differentiation came from different cultural contexts, but had always kept that same root of that unified civilization. I think so. It's a bit of both in that regard, I would say. Yeah, and what's in fact what the priesthood would dream of doing consciously. Of course, that's not probably what unconsciously they want, but consciously, what they would dream of doing would be to reform, reconstruct that unified civilization, which is impossible.
Would this link to, say, biodigitalism, Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus, the idea of the re-envisioning of society along the basis of AI governance, the idea of, even biodigital implantation, control through that means CBDC systems and things such as that. Is that what you refer to?
Yes, the unification, the actual unification of the collective mind under one God in that sense, of course, not actual God, but you know what I mean, over one consciousness that is over this entirety, and that would be the ultimate conscious plan, although subconsciously, because they also have their shadows, their shadow forces working in opposition. Subconsciously, what they actually intend is to be revealed, is to be to reach Olympus, let's say, in a metaphorical sense, and present their grievances to the gods of Olympus, right? Present their case. It's like, again, what I wrote in that chapter of Hephaestus being cast out of Olympus because he was lame, because he was handicapped, and being made fun of by the Olympians. But the Olympians need him to build their relics and their weapons and all of that.
The broken are the more evolved from that
Correct.
M. Night Shyamalan's.
And so he wants to go back to Olympus and invert things and present his grievances towards the Olympus crowd, right? That is what subconsciously they actually want to do. But yes, the plan in conscious terms would be to rebuild that unified civilization. That even if we are to believe that was a fact, and I personally do think that there was a unified civilization, but whether we do or not, but if we come from that principle that there was a unified civilization, even that unified civilization that was seemingly even more perfect than the one they intend to build now, even that one fell, right? So the opposing balancing force of this creation, this reality, that always seeks the equilibrium, that always seeks the balance between the opposites, is not only undeniable, but it can't be contained. If you go to one extreme, you can be sure that eventually it's just a matter of time that the other extreme, the balancing force, will topple you. Right? If you're too proud, you will be ashamed. If you're too ashamed, you will one day be proud, until you find the balance between both, which is the actual purpose of self-knowledge.
Yeah, which is the point of stasis. It's the point of control.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting. David Bowie. It's a very obscure song of his. I believe it was on "The Man Who Sold the World." album. It's called The Supermen, and it goes, "When all the world was very young and mountain magic heavy hung, the Supermen would walk in file, guardians of a loveless isle." Again, this is sort of speaking to these conceptions of the Adam Kadmon or the Saturnian Golden Age, the Saturnia Regna, like what you're discussing here. And gloomy browed with super fear, their endless tragic lives could heave nor sigh, in solemn serenity, wondrous beings chained to life. Strange games they would play then, no death for the perfect men. Life rolls into one for them, so softly a super god cries. We're all where minds in uni thought, power weird by mystics taught, no pain, no joy, no power too great, colossal strength to grasp a fate. We're sad-eyed mermen tossed in slumbers, nightmare dreams no mortal mind could hold. A man would tear his brother's flesh, a chance to die to turn to mould. Far out in the red sky, far out from the sad eyes, strange, mad celebration so softly, a super god cries. And then it repeats itself, but it's that idea where sad-eyed mermen tossed in slumbers, nightmare dreams no mortal could hold. A man would tear his brother's flesh, a chance to die, to turn to mould. It's almost, it seems to be speaking to the notion that if we are to take the conception, the Hesiodic conception of the Golden Age of Saturn, that as it devolved, people became more and more aggressive to one another, like Cain and Abel. Murder actually occurred between them. There was conflict between them. It's almost like they desired, they couldn't live in perfection. It's similar to what appears within the Matrix. You know, the agent Smith states to Neo, you couldn't live in perfection. The perfect utopian system would always lead you to rebel. It would lead you to self-destruction. And within inertia, it seems that those who abide within existence must invoke decay by their actions. It seems that it is an inevitability in that sense.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very similar to the notion that everything that exists will always descend into lower and lower vibrational states. So it's almost the inverse of evolution, you know, in an ironic sense, that we are not progressing. We're almost devolving, but we're devolving through advancing, through the advancing of technology. So as technology advances, we spiritually devolve. We mentally devolve, as we see. Though we're spiritually, we're technologically advancing, people seem to be being rendered as not just absolutely moot, but they almost seem to be, you know, almost like mental invalids. In many cases, I mean, look at the total destruction of just diction, good diction and vocabulary, good manners, social equilibrium.
The concept of innuendo doesn't even exist in 2024.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting, that contrast, you know.
Yeah. I think yes. I think it is a devolution, and it matches again what we were, or at least I brought up previously, that it is a Sabbatean idea of devolution. In this, it is a provoked devolution. It is to bring about the worst, so that the good can come and counter as using the natural forces. Let's say, you know, it has to emerge inevitably because things have gone so low, right? So because it is always trying to balance itself out. It's and we observe this in everything. Everything wants to be in stasis, right? It wants to be in balance. You uh, make waves on a pond like you throw a stone into a pond.
Yeah.
It will make waves until it quiets down. It doesn't continue to make waves until, for eternity. It tries to balance itself out,
Yeah,
and
it will
quiet.
descend to its
Yeah,
level. Yeah.
yeah, it just levels out by itself. And that's why, electric currents happen, because balance is inevitable. It's an induction kind of thing. It's an inductive force. So, yeah. And this is not to say that, again, their intentions are good, and it's not an apologetics of the priesthood, but it is a collateral certainty that with so much of this, and they certainly use and choose the henchmen that are more prone to um, nefarious behavior, exactly for that reason, I think, because it brings about quicker deconstruction of things, so that then they can be balanced out. The bigger the rock, that throws down, the harsher must be the force that pulls up. Right?
Well, it's similar to even lightning, or it will always
Yeah.
seek the earth
Yes.
after its uh, energetic ejection. It will always seek the earth. It seeks. It seems that the bed of decay.
Mhm.
What is soil, but the byproduct of decay.
Yeah, I found it interesting you mentioned that M. Night Shyamalan trilogy. We watched that recently, and I almost wanted to bring that. I think that should be one of the Armin Rai's movie in his list of movies,
Yeah.
important movies. I found I think that guy he's really trying to say something with his films, especially that the last one. I almost felt like that all of the action, the scripting, the visuals, the story was kind of used to be able to force these more kind of like metaphysical messages into the themes, Um, and yeah, I heard he mentioned something about Mehdi said something about being in the light, and that was kind of a big part of one of the characters with the multiple personalities, like which one would get the light at any given time, And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the kind of like psychotherapy modality of internal family systems, which is really
Yeah.
similar to everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
About that we're made up of all these different parts, and sometimes it's not as extreme as the disassociated personalities in that movie where the personalities were completely different, but I think we do have these aspects of our psychology, that our psyche, whatever, that take over and dominate whoever is running the show in a particular moment. And yeah, I could watch it again. I just found so many interesting things that run kind of in parallel, or that interconnect with a lot of the stuff that we talk about on these channels. I was fascinated with that film. Their series of films.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. The idea of I think was it called Glass, or I forget the one where it was just simply the individual who had the multiple personality disorders. I forget the name of the movie now. I think the last one was called Glass, but yeah, it's very interesting the concept that he tackles within that movie, specifically with that character of the multiple personalities, and that idea where I think the last personality that seems to encompass them all, or is created from them all, is is the greatest shadow of all, which I think it's called the Beast, right?
The Beast, right?
Uh,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this Beast is the pure agglomeration of all of the various negative energies of all, I think, of all of the other archetypes. And it's, of course, all of the trauma. It's the descent, the evolutionary descent of all of this trauma that was held by, God, I forget the James McAvoy, the original archetype, the original personality.
The
Personality's
name that could be the thing that could tame him if they said his name, Harry Crumb or whatever is something Crumb, I think, Wendell Crumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the end, it was like unconditional love had the power to kind of stop the beast and tame it. Yeah, it's just
Which
a lot of
sort of
powerful.
that sort of harkens back to the idea that, wherever there is love, there is God. Because that idea of love within the world, even though the world, the backdrop seems to be suffering, death, the reciprocity of essentially savagery within nature, you have these, what is the sweetness amongst the bitter water, which is, love, for example, unconditional love. The idea that breaks our need for self-preservation. It permits us the expression of our higher essence. I think that's what it's speaking to within that movie. The idea that we may live in the devil's playground, but God is always there in us. And even within the tumult of this primordial sea of the unconscious, which is exhibited, for example, within multiple personalities, where it's it's a sort of raging storm within that sea of the unconscious, and all of these various personalities of sort of it being created within that through the trauma. That the original personality or man, I forget his name, James McAvoy, his original character, experienced, that it can all be tamed, it can all be reversed, that the shadow can be quelled vis-a-vis that, the inclusion of the first principle of God, of, like what Armin stated, that other side of the contrast and divide,
And it is I guess too that the whole idea of that love is, it's sort of like kryptonite to the psychopathic control type of personality or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And another movie that kind of it's I find it to be similar, and it's just stated in a different way, maybe regarding a different aspect. Did you ever see The Looper with James Gordon-Levitt?
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, at some point you're just like, we're just going to break the cycle, and that it seems to be like the biggest challenge is like we have this kind of never-ending cycle of doing things the same way and having these archetypes and patterns and things that are sort of perpetuated throughout the ages. And at some point, you have to, I guess, make a decision. It's probably a more personal one, that you're going to break that cycle and not play that particular game anymore, whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, well, of course that crops up, like what you're alluding to within people's own lives. So the microcosm, but even in the macrocosm, even the cycles of history and civilization. How do we break that cycle? That's the most potent and important question of our time and of any time. And, you know, we constantly just go round the sort of corrupted wheel, and we know the trajectory, we know where it will end. How do we get off? How do we get off this sort of ride from hell? And nobody seems inclined to want to answer that. And if anyone seeks to answer that and put their head above the parapet, it seems that the corrupted system and he who holds the wheel within his grasp, you know, sends his minions after that person. It's yeah.
Well, I guess it's like the idea maybe that the people who benefit most from that, the chaos and the whatever, the beast running, the psyche, because the beast is not there's no nuance, there's no analysis or I guess restraint or whatever. It's just that sort of action, but it's more of a response to trauma that's I guess galvanized or whatever. But when people are when the beast has the light, so to speak, that it's the traumatic response. It's not a considered position. It's more reactive and probably much easier to control, and so it works for them to have more people go into the dark side, I guess we should say, and it's easier for them to be maintained, I guess, even though there's probably the possibility of a massive tip into chaos that could become completely uncontrolled. But it seems like for up to this point, they've been able to manage that pretty well, I guess. I heard you talking about civilizations falling, but I kind of wonder. I mean, what has anything ever really fallen, or does it just kind of keep going the same direction?
Well, that's a good bloody point, actually.
We think these civilizations have fallen, but did they fall, or did they just get reorganized and rebranded? And so that's my one thing about this is like I'm not. You always talk about fallen civilizations, but because it does seem like things continue to go a particular direction, at least as far as the macro is concerned.
Yeah,
But
it's merely the mask that changes in many ways. That's all that changes, if that.
Yeah, but all these things really, I just see it kind of like all played out for me, like kind of internally, like it's the whole,
I agree.
all this stuff that I look out in the world and see going on, and the confusion and the chaos and the personalities and the whatever, the beast versus this or that, and I look at all of that going on in my own internal universe. It's just a kind of a reflection, I guess, in some ways, and then there's obviously a range and degrees of how much of one thing is dominant at any particular time, I guess.
Well, it's just that idea that what is contained within the microcosm is also contained within the macrocosm, and vice versa. And even like that idea that you see in a Split, I think that was the name of the movie, where the multiple personalities, where he just constantly he keeps self-dividing to hide, to create, to almost in a way like what the universe did in the beginning, to carve out to carve out space where he can hide within, to hide from the shadow of the trauma that he experienced in the beginning that set off this chain reaction. So it's that idea that figments create their own figments, imagination conjures its own imagination. We in many ways, by the act of us thinking, we establish our own torture, our own torment in many ways. It's by the fact that we overthink things or just think about things in general. You create angles to those thoughts which harbor their own shadows and things such as that. And of course as well, yeah, like what you're saying, we go through our own, our the microcosm reflects the macrocosm and all of this. So it's like one giant wheel within a wheel. It's very much like the Flammarion, that idea of the Flammarion with the wheel within a wheel, and then he peers outside of this dome and he just sees more, wheels within wheels, similar to like Ezekiel's vision or something, It's the same idea, metaphysically. It's all really contained internally, and it seems that we're, I don't know, either projecting outwards, or we view that which is outwards to us from an internal perspective, be it unconscious or in a conscious manner, So we create our own world, we create our own hell in many ways.
Yeah, what powers the devil in the metaphysical and metaphorical sense can be seen, for example, in the movie Memento. I don't know if you recall that movie.
Yeah.
Where basically you see the main character, he is unable to form short term, so he has to leave these notes tattooed or written in his body so that he steers himself into certain ideas or behaviors or whatever. And in the end of the movie, which is basically the beginning of the movie, because the movie goes backwards, he realizes that he has been the criminal. He has been the evil one, right? And what he did was he made notes in order to make sure to steer himself away from realizing that he was evil, right? And so this is an act of the rejection that we were talking about before, where since that part of him does not fit his self-image, right? He prefers to hide it, to reject it, to cast it to hell, to oblivion, let's say, to forgetfulness, and to pretend that everything in him is in accordance with his self-image, which is basically what the metaphorical image of God does. God pretends that everything that he did was good, right? And of course, we're talking metaphors, not objectively. And so, if God is the self-image and the devil is the rejected part of God, then that becomes clear in a depiction such as seen in Memento, where when God, the self-image, is faced with the devil that comes from him, with the potential of him that he doesn't agree with, he casts it, he rejects it. He even alters the memory to make sure that it's hidden from himself, right? So that he doesn't have to deal with the responsibility of what he's done, of what he's created. So I think that that is actually what the dynamics of what powers a shadow or what powers a devil. And that, of course, then the forces of balancing eventually bring it to the fore again, because you can only put this amount of perfume onto crap before the smell, before the stench comes through anyway, right? So.
Right. I got voted off the island kind of by JLB last weekend.
You were what?
Oh, was that in Fakeologist?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, he accused me of being a curmudgeon and being all negative when I come to the call. And say this particular disagreement was about chemtrails, and I have, I guess, maybe fairly strong opinions that are contrary to IPS and Ab himself about the nature of this phenomenon. And
Well, explain
it wasn't the
explain to
first
us
time.
what's your position.
I don't have any particular knowledge. My position is I can look into the sky and see a manufactured thing
Yeah.
that I'm convinced is put there by design for a particular reason. And that's pretty much as far as I go. I don't know the nature of it, and I don't know why, but I do know that it's not some byproduct of commercial air traffic or that sort of thing, or with what they claim that this thing is, the mainstream debunker crowd. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the websites like what is it, the Rational Wiki or
Yes.
Skeptics or
Yeah.
which are just a hair's breadth away from Snopes, and what they
Yeah.
debunk conspiracy theories by unabashedly and unquestionably accepting mainstream narratives, right?
Yeah.
So the IPS and a lot of the people on the call are kind of like saying, well, I don't know, they could be ice. I mean, you could have a plane that just has water, moisture in its exhaust that forms ice crystals that spit out behind it. And I'm like, in
This.
108-degree Austin in the middle of the summer, that these ice
Yeah.
crystals spray into a fine concentrated stream, and over the course of hours they dissipate, forming a haze of ice
I
in the
know.
summer. I mean, I guess maybe, but that doesn't make sense to me. And so I think
It's
that,
well. I
and
mean, it
I get a
occurs
little
here as
bit,
well. Sorry.
huh?
It occurs here
Well,
as
that
well. You know, it's something that's universal, where it seems to be being done all over. And I mean,
well,
sorry to interject. Please continue.
no, it's an Ab claims that he never sees them in Toronto. And I don't live in Toronto, so I can't speak to that. I'm like, well, if you don't see them there, lucky for you. I went to Flagstaff last year to visit. I saw Clusterfuck and Luna, Fustercluck, excuse me. I didn't mean to swear. Luna, Beachy. I think there might have been one other of us there. I can't remember now. And when I was in Flagstaff, Arizona, and probably even from the airport in Phoenix, for the whole, it was 3 or 4 days I was there, I never saw one. And so, maybe there's certain places that are kind of immune from time to time or something. I don't know. But I know in my experience, where I lived in Florida for a long time and here, it's a regular thing and
Oh yeah, I see them as well all the time.
very obviously different to the days when they don't happen. And I took a picture actually the other day of the white fluffy clouds and the clear blue sky with the trails kind of behind them going across the sky, and the residue that they leave compared to like natural clouds. It's very obvious to me that these are different things. They're not, and just the amount of support that people on the call were given to the sort of mainstream idea that, oh, there's, these aren't the droids you're looking for. There's nothing to see here. That was so. People started talking over me, and they were getting very committed to their position.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I have no position either way. What they could be or what they are. I mean, I have theories on what they could be, but I mean, the idea as well that they're merely just ice crystals, presupposes the notion that the individuals in charge of geoengineering or whatever the hell they may be doing are not perfidious people, that they have our best interests in heart, or the best interests of nature at heart. So when you're bombarded with media narratives claiming that Bill Gates wants to, like the undead vampire lord that he is, wants to blot out the sun via chemical clouds, and then you see chemical clouds being formed in the upper atmosphere, you're not going to presuppose that they're simply just ice crystals and it's all natural, and like what you're saying, these are not the droids you're looking for. It's
Well,
yeah.
One of the comments that Ab made, because I have pretty good long range vision, so I can see not with any great detail, but I think feel fairly confident when I see these things flying and emitting these trails. They're white unmarked planes very far away, and none of these things are ever anywhere near airport flight paths.
Mm-hmm.
They're always all over in different places. And so, my point is like, I think IPS and AB, they're just claiming they don't see them. They're not. And I'm like, I feel like I'm kind of like being gaslighted, because I'm like, I just look up in the sky and I see this. I'm not making a judgment, but don't try to tell me that my eyes are deceiving me. That's like,
Yeah.
that's a level of gaslighting that I find kind of annoying. And then, and Ab's like, well, then you got to go. Where are they? Where are the bases? Tell me, you got to go find the bases that these planes leave from. And I'm like, no, I don't. I look up in the sky and I see the sun and I say it's there. I don't have to know what it's made of. I don't know who put it there. It's just there.
It's very similar to the chicken in the chicken coop that's saying to all the other chickens, listen, I'm going to show you the plan, and we get slaughtered and we head to KFC and they turn us into fried chicken, and then the chickens are like, oh really right, well show us these restaurants, these KFC restaurants. Well, we can't really, because we can't get out of the chicken coop. I would.
And then he's like, and where's okay, where's Fred? Where's Jack? Where's Johnny? They were here last week. They're not here. Where do you think they went? I don't know. They just let them out. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Anyway,
don't get me wrong. Yeah, I mean, Ab's a cool guy. I mean, they're all fairly. I quite enjoy speaking to Rick and all of that as well. But yeah, on that I have to disagree with them.
Well,
I see them myself.
It was mainly John Laban, because it's like and I read a quote of, I think it was on a jacket of one of Kurt Vonnegut's books once upon a time. We used to really like, but he's kind of sort of supports communism. He has the wrong answers to the right questions, I guess.
Yeah.
But they called his writing "Sugar Pills with Bitter Coating," and
right.
at one of the calls we were on, I just said, I said, one of the biggest problems that we have as humans is this idea that government can be somehow benevolent and can have our best interest and do, and obviously some people benefit tremendously from government largesse or whatever, and there's probably some people that are absolutely, but in a cost benefit analysis, it's like an albatross around the neck of humanity. It can never be reformed or be good, or because foundationally it's based on moral
premises,
principles that are, it's a double standard, rules for thee and not for me, and the whole absolute power corrupts absolutely and all that sort of thing. And he's like, oh, well, you're just being so negative. Like, I don't like listening to you say all this negative stuff. And, like, well, I'm just
that's not necessarily
saying
negative.
It just is what it is. Yeah. You can judge it negatively or not. If it conflicts with your idea of what it is, maybe you should just explain to me how I'm wrong. But just telling me that I'm negative for stating what I consider to be obvious and easily argued and proven.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
goes against,
and so
it goes against the self-image, right? So we go
Yeah.
back to that same thing. And the
Yeah.
self-image could
I was
also be a
accused.
projection onto the world. We see humans a certain way, and if something invalidates that image that we have of fellow humans, then that also has to be rejected to maintain that initial image. So yeah, it's it is sort of a psychological conundrum that we all have. In those terms, in regards to the trails, I do see them as well, but I just don't know. I don't think that they are necessarily one way or the other. They are, if they are ice or if they are chemicals.
Mhm.
They could also be something provided to have us arguing over
True.
it. Like
That's my
an illusion trick. In the sense of
Mhm.
you provide something that is visible, and you get two opposite sides arguing over it, which is basically an illusion. It could also be that, So, but in any case, the thing about people that talk about, oh, that's negative, that's too much negativity or something like that, usually has to do with, on the one hand, the image that they have of society or humanity, and ultimately the image that they have of themselves. It
Yeah.
means that usually they want to hide from the negativity of themselves. So, as someone saying that I would never do that, and it's already a given that they have that potential. Otherwise, they would not need to say it. It wouldn't even occur to them. So,
Yeah, I haven't listened to it yet because I really admire actually both of you gentlemen and Silas, and meditating too. I'll go include you of having a very sort of relaxed delivery about is almost like always, and I sometimes I get a little strident, and maybe I might get an edge to my tone or something, and I need to work on that. And I know that at the time that I joined the call, I was sort of having some personal things going on that may have, you know, leached into my psyche at the time, and it made me be a little bit more have a little more edge than I would have liked to have had. Huh?
we didn't notice anything, so you're safe.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't. Well, did you have you listened to that? The
No, he
one
means
that
on
I'm
the
talking about?
the other
Yeah.
call, Armin.
Oh, the other call. I thought you were referring to this one. I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh no, it's it's kind of interesting too because like that that's sort of the nature of this sequence. So it might create a more relaxed environment in general that makes it easier. But that's where the rubber meets the road, right? When things do start to get any sort of that's when you really need to have the skill or tools or whatever to be able to keep yourself in check and maintain a relaxed and
Yeah.
neutral disposition. And I still have some work to do in that area.
Well,
Yeah,
I
well-
mean, the issue is as well. I mean, it would really quite annoy me too if the gaslighting where you're seeing these things and they're telling you you're not seeing these things. I mean, that is quite annoying. I think it's an automatic or instinctual response by a human being. I mean, you have to, again, like what you stated, Armin, that idea of the negativity. I was also on one of my recent videos, the most recent one actually on YouTube, Prometheus Unbound, and I go into in detail the managerial revolution, the managerial estate, and one of the comments, apart from the triggered flat earther in the comment, I don't know why I used the term global. It wasn't even the entire video wasn't even about the flat earth. I didn't mention it at all. I just by accident or just instinctually used the word global in the beginning, and I didn't use the words earthly or worldly, or so it was
The right pronoun.
I didn't use the right. I actually brought that up, Tom. I said you're like the woke crowd, they, them, or it's mom, instead of it's mom, it's the plane. Well, anyway, and there was another comment where they stated, I had to turn you off, mate. It's just so negative. And I said to him, I'm not emotionally invested in any of, I don't look at this through the lens of emotion. So I don't really see it as positive or negative. And I get that quite a lot. And I look at it purely analytically. I'm not married to any of the beliefs that are, contained within the information. I don't become so invested in it that you feel negativity toward, from it. Don't get me wrong. Some of what the managerialists seek to do is completely insane. It's terrifying. But then you take solace in the fact that they won't succeed. They won't succeed because it's an inevitability of their destruction. It's a total inevitability just by the properties of their own nature.
No, that's exactly right. That's such a good point to bring up because I think oftentimes when any of us are being accused of speaking negatively, it's really just a reflection of someone else's own psychological distress. Whether these concepts are new or just it's challenging their worldview, it's going to be perceived as negativity. So I've been trying my best to always couple it to exactly what you just said, just the inevitable failure, how things should work out for the best, regardless of how dark or bleak future might seem.
Yeah, well, it's like what you're stating regarding that conversation farce, where these individuals do, I'm sure they're great people, but I see it a lot. They think that putting their head in the proverbial sand will, reduce fear-mongering, as they call it. But the thing is, if you remain in ignorance, if you don't view the shadow, if you don't, attempt to reintegrate the monster, if you don't attempt to rein in the monster, then the ignorance itself will eventually invoke fear within you. Once you can no longer hide your head in the sand. I mean, eventually you have to face the dark. All children must, for them to grow into adults. So if you just constantly remain in willful and blissful ignorance, that doesn't help anyone. It merely it multiplies, it amplifies that eventual fear that you will acquire once the storm reaches your position. You have to prepare now. You have to look at it analytically, look at it like an adult, look at the information. Don't become, ideological or married to beliefs, but analyze every side, analyze the information, understand what you're up against, what are those chemtrails in the sky? I don't know, but they're probably not ice. You're in the middle of Texas in summer. I mean, the place,
But
it's
and
a
then
literal
if they're
desert.
not ice, if they're not ice, maybe it's something bad, and I don't want to think that there's bad stuff falling on me from the sky. I mean,
Yeah.
and Linda made the point though too, and she's made it before. She's a big fan of IPS as well, and I feel like she has maybe some issues taking an oppositional stand to the things he says. But she's like, well, my garden is fine, and this stuff is falling all the time, and the plants are growing, and I'm not having any trouble eating them, and I don't, we're not all, having respiratory issues, and so there's not particular evidence that they're necessarily negative that we know about or can conclude with any certainty.
Mhm.
But my point is just it's just something. It's something going on that they're doing, and they're keeping it.
But
Keep
it
it.
is.
And the other
Sorry.
thing about it too, and I read an article a long time ago about a
Mhm.
certain percentage, and it was fairly high of people. They say they never look up. They don't look at the sky. And I think a lot of people, I'm not sure, I haven't talked to people, I don't poll, but I think a lot of people probably don't even really notice them. They don't even know they're there. It's
I think
hard
you're
to
spot on.
imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, because there's if you just look up, it's impossible to miss. But knowing that, I think a lot of people just don't see them.
I think.
But
I think is. Sorry, Armin. You go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say really quickly. It's. I mean, it's in many ways it is automatically negative. It's negative by default, but because even if it's totally benign, what's going on, the fact that the state would seek to, I mean, they're cloud seeding to some degree, because even if it's ice crystals, it's forming into some form of vapor, some form of cloud. By them even cloud seeding, hence geoengineering, that itself is by default negative, because they would seek, without referendum, without the input of the people, would seek to tailor or re-envision the environment of the people, the very the very environment of nature. They want to change it, sculpt it. It's without the input of us,
Right.
It's negative on that, just on that point alone. Sorry, Armin, I interrupted you.
I was just going to ask Fars, but you say you were banned from Fakeologist?
No, it was just another one of JLB's criticisms of my whatever was that I come in the middle of the call, and that was evidently he had an issue with that somehow. Like if I'm not in class when the bell rings, then maybe I shouldn't have the opportunity to raise my hand later or whatever. But they on the Saturday they start the call at like 3 a.m. or something my time. So it's like, oh, would I have to set my alarm for 3 a.m. and get up and log on and then just make sure that I'm there, and then later when I wake up, actually I'll ask a question or make a comment. And just he accused me of being negative and a curmudgeon, and I come on to drop negativity and blah blah. He's got a problem with me.
Anyone else of being negative?
Huh?
So that guy accused anybody else of being negative. That's kind of funny.
Has he? I don't keep up with him, but what I did.
That's in general, like including you.
What about him? No,
the idea of him accusing you or anyone else to be negative is just kind of funny.
Well, and the other thing that's kind of funny too is I'm like, well, we're here on channels, this and all these channels, basically deconstructing the fact that almost everything we've ever been told or believed or thought about the world and all the revered institutions has been a lie and it's false. I mean, that's not like a warm, fuzzy kind of thing. Generally, it takes a little while to adjust to that and say, okay, I understand this now and I accept it and I can live with it. But it's not a cat video that we're
No, it's totally negative. I mean, it's the idea of subtractive growth that you have to unlearn to then create the void where you can thus sort of build back from the very bottom. I mean, I'm going to be honest. When I was in school, at high school, and I started to be inundated with this information. I mean, it negatively affected my grades, amongst other things, but that was going on at the time. But it negatively affected even my mental state because you're in that limbo. So it's negative. It's what you're doing. What we're doing it negates what was there previously. I mean, it all does. It's just so bizarre.
It implies death. It implies death of mental character. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is it's negative. So, but that's not necessarily to say that all negativity will not lead to positivity. It usually does, but it's not also to say that negativity itself is inherently wrong. I mean, it's a very simplistic way of viewing the world, where they view it as black and white. You know, it's similar to how the NPCs view it. I stated to that individual, it said, well, you say the way you said it was very negative, but I stated to him, but the world that you live in, this dystopia, it wasn't created by goose stepping fascists, right? They didn't goose step down, when they brought in COVID, they didn't goose step down the high street or the main street, with their syringes, shouldered, like some sort of parade in military. No, they brought it in via rainbows and colourful, propaganda. And you've got to wash your hands while singing "Happy Birthday" for 20 seconds, and everything in the world. It's all euphemism. It's all positive language. They're not going to.
Exactly. That's funny.
They're not.
Yeah.
They're not going to say we want
people, and they used people who are addicted to positivity to do that.
Yeah,
Exactly. Right.
I mean, look at sorry, Farish, you go.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if you go ahead and finish your thought.
No, I was going to say, well, they don't call it. We're going to people. They call it, white privilege. Which sounds better. They don't say we want everyone to be assimilated into the state, government, and religion and society and the big data society. They call it inclusion. It's euphemisms. It's very positive language. It's using positivity as the vehicle for negativity, if that makes sense. Sorry, first you go.
Well, I think you're really onto something, and I noticed this, and actually, I might have to revisit this book. I saw this author interviewed on a show. The book's called Bright Sided. I don't know if you ever heard of it, and she was kind of taking issue with this idea that our whole purpose and the thing that's the idea that's promoted is that the default state of everybody should be the thing that we should be working for and working toward all the time. Our primary goals and purposes should be to be happy. That's the number one priority that we should all be striving for, is to be happy. And it but at what cost? If you can only be happy if you are insulated from anything that challenges your way of thinking or offends you, because taking offense now, that's a big thing. The thing you said offended me, and that is put some sort of, that's had a negative impact on my ability to be happy. So you can't say that thing because I might not be happy. And she was sort of, I think the book is about this whole happiness dictum is overrated as far as being, having a goal and a purpose. And that leads me back to another book that I read, you people are probably familiar with, that I need to revisit, called Flow, from Mikhail, some Eastern European name I can't pronounce. But, he had got this idea of being in a flow state where, sort of time stops and your focus is so intense. And it's almost like a meditate. You're in the present, you're in the moment. You're in thing.
That's right.
And that he had interviewed a bunch of high functioning people, like surgeons, athletes, musicians, or whatever, that are really, and rock climbers, whatever, marathon, all these people, they get in that flow state, but when they're in that state, none of them said they were happy. They were probably the
Yeah.
most fulfilled and satisfied that they had ever been, but like happiness is not necessarily a part of it,
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so I think that, maybe this whole, but it does seem like the whole agenda with all the inclusivity and all the, and if you have time for just a second, I could share a story of an event where that I was a bunch of investment bankers from all over the country, a very posh hotel, very high end, and they gave out a couple of awards, and one of the award winners was this middle-aged guy, and they're all dressed in Savile Row, bespoke, whatever, and he gets up and he accepts his award, and he gives a little speech, and in the course of it, he talks about how welcome he feels in the company, and it's such a community, and he finally felt safe enough to come out as a gay man after 45 years or whatever, and leave his wife and his 3 children and hook up with his gay high school crush, and I'm like, why aren't you talking about how you hit your numbers or what the big whale of a client that you brought in that was responsible for whatever award he got? I don't even know, but it's like this kumbaya oversharing of all these personal details, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't, and I was telling my wife, and you mentioned it earlier, it's like this would be a scene that you might find in some movie that, like a cringeworthy thing they put in, but it's almost impossible to parody anything anymore because things have
Oh
become a
yeah.
parody of
Yeah.
themselves by default. It's just so strange. I was listening to this and I was like, where have we?
Somebody was
I miss
mentioning
the
that.
Mad Men era,
Somebody was mentioning that regarding the Grand Theft Auto 5 being that it was the comment was that is a parody of real life, and then you fast forward to Grand Theft Auto 6 and just the trailer alone, if you've seen it, it literally is. I think it's intended to be a parody of real life, but because we've descended so far from Grand Theft Auto 5 in like 2013, it's literally become just a reflection of real life.
right.
So it's no longer even a parody. It's they're trying to make it into a parody, but it really just becomes a reflection. But it's well, the problem is as well, because no one wants to hear anything that's hateful or negative. You end up getting a society which has insulated itself from any reform, and it's in dire need of reform. It's in dire need of restructuring, and it won't get it because it can't look into the mirror, because like Dorian Gray, it doesn't want to see its own portrait. It doesn't want to face the shadow. It doesn't want to face the dire its dire complexion that it's turned into since it last looked in that mirror or last looked at that portrait. So you're in it, because they don't want negativity. You're not going to get anything that's positive. We're just going to pretend that the negativity that's accruing from our inability to acknowledge the negativity is not there. So it's crazy. It's so absurd to describe it, but yeah.
And the other part of that equation too, I think, is that the cognitive dissonance is very uncomfortable, and so it's like, oh well, you're presenting me with an idea that runs contrary to things I'm very emotionally invested in, and it causes me discomfort, so I can't listen to your idea. It's like I can't. The
Yeah.
other side of that would be, oh, I'm going to listen and see what you have to say and weigh it against what I taken to be, my accepted as fact prior, and see which holds up
Yeah.
better, and then make a considered determination and reject it or accept it. You're like, no, I just can't hear it because it causes discomfort.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and
Well,
that's kind of the space that we're in here, I guess,
Yeah, our minds are like the bubble boy now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what they're stating or what they're admitting to, confessing to, with that implicitly, with that idea that this is negative, I cannot hear it, is that they are emotionally incontinent juveniles. That they can, you know, they haven't taken that leap intellectually that they can listen to ideas that they don't agree with, but just to understand the perspective of it. So, in a sense, and this, I mean, when I was an adolescent, especially, arguing on YouTube and arguing with people, you become really sort of fanatical when you're arguing, and you don't want to hear the other side because it evokes an emotional response in you. And the great leap that you have to make, the great sort of, chasm of evolution that you have to cross, is to listen to things that are uncomfortable to the point where you no longer have a value judgment emotionally on the idea. You have an analytical judgment on it, on its merits alone. Or you just listen to it from a neutral standpoint to understand the perspective. Only then can you, sort of reach that point of, where you can take in knowledge, you can take in information without ascribing negativity or positivity to it. You can filter it just based on its merits.
Well, that's for me personally. It's almost like the holy grail of the emotional space that I want to inhabit. Is that truly? There's like there's a I don't, it's not a maybe a parable about some sort of yogi master in some village that he gets accused of all these different things and things happen, and his whole answer to everything is always, "Is that so?" And they
Is
say,
that
and
so?
yeah, something happens, and he helps this girl out. He gets accused of making her pregnant, and then it turns out something, and like all these different permutations of the story. And sometimes he's the villain, sometimes he's the savior, but at every turn, he's like, "Is that so?" People are saying this. Is that so? And it's like that, just that it's sort of very benign and neutral. Like you're just like saying, "Oh, I'm hearing this, and it's not causing me any. I'm just asking the question. Oh, is that a fact? Oh, really? And yeah, you're an asshole. Is that so?" that's the response that I want to be able to have internally to almost anything I hear. And but then again, kind of gets down to the other idea of, well, is anger ever an appropriate response for certain situations? Is that ever warranted? I mean, we have this emotion built into us for some reasons, and then if it is appropriate, then how do you because it most of the time when we get angry, it's subconscious. We don't have control over it, right? All of a sudden, we're just in this emotional state of anger, and it's it's reactive and unconscious. So, but then, when is it warranted? I guess is the question.
I would say, and this is the thing, when a person makes you angry, they have complete control over you through that emotion. Even if you act out violently with that anger, they may be doing that they may wish you to exhibit that sort of violent or angered response to either make you look negative, to put you in a negative light amongst the rest of the group,
Bingo.
or so they character assassinate you by default, essentially, or they want you to strike them if it be in real life, because they may, I don't know, they may desire that you be charged, they may want the state to exert power on their behalf, or things such as that, right? So, yeah, don't get me wrong, anger is actually a healthy emotion, in some situations. I mean, but believe you me, I'm not saying be Zen. Totally, you can't bottle things up. If someone really, is just really grinding your gears, it's actually healthy to sort of let the anger out in some situations. But I view it along those lines, that if they make you angry, and you can be angry and not show it, but if you exhibit the anger, that they may be doing that because they control you at that point, because you're acting impulsively. But yeah.
Well, that's very well understood in sports and maybe poker and certain things. What do they call it? Getting in your opponent's head.
Yeah.
You get them off balance, because then they're acting emotionally and they're not
Getting
strategic. Yeah, tilted. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's a very interesting comment you made, Silas, about being controlled by the object of your anger or whatever. I hadn't thought of things in that way.
Yeah, all I'd add to that is I think anger really is, if we want to come as close as we can to objectively calling it appropriate at any time, I'd say when all other means have been exhausted, as an absolute last resort, that's the emotion you might need to fall on to get results. But otherwise, I think it's something that needs to be mitigated.
But but if you have that space between the stimulants and the response, it's almost like it might not even happen at that point, right? Because generally, when at least when I get angry, it's almost always unconscious.
Right.
It's
It requires conscious down regulation. It's not something that you can consciously prevent.
So you're speaking of it as almost like making a choice of, well, I've exhausted everything else, so I'm going to go this route. But most of the time, it happens first without consideration.
Right. So to clarify, I meant choosing to act on it is rather.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
Well, anger does have a place, and we do witness it everywhere in nature, even in animal behavior. The problem comes when that anger is not let go of, because one thing is a momentary response to a perceived threat. Whether that threat is real or not, that is a different question. But if you perceive a threat that you feel requires that sort of a response, it is not out of place. But it is out of place if you hold on to it, in the sense of, next time you're going to respond even further. You're going to build up on the previous response and go even further. And so it becomes a sort of a cycle onto itself. But then there's also anger. And actually, before you came in, Fars, that was part of the conversation I was having with Silas. There's also anger and other types of responses that come from embodying someone else's shadow. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you are put in positions where you are reflecting someone else's repressed material and you don't even know it. And so you get a sort of subconscious response to that someone that is not even coming from you. And you don't even realize, well, why did I feel that way? And that sometimes comes from the fact that you were just at hand. You were just there as a sort of mirror that provoked the embodiment of a shadow that you were reflecting to someone else. So it wasn't even yours. But anger does have a place. Everything, even death, has a place in the manifestation. So it's not out of place, and it's not necessarily, controlled or repressed every time. by any means, in my view.
To the center of the city where a road's been waiting for you. To the depths of the ocean where a hope sang searching for you. I was moving through the silence without motion, waiting for you. In a room with a window in the corner, I found truth. In the shadow play, acting out your own death, knowing no more. There's the assassins